Hello, I'm Roberto Rodriguez, Special Assistant to the President for Education. I'm joined here by the Assistant to the President, Melody Barnes, who's the Director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. Today we'll be taking your questions and having a discussion about our education policy agenda. Yesterday, the President announced a new expansion to the Race to the Top program, dedicating $1.35 billion to expand this education reform effort across the country and also incorporate school districts into a new competition to reform, strengthen, and improve our public education system. We'll be taking questions today from pre-advanced questions from BlogHer, as well as some questions from Facebook. We'll also be encouraging you to join us and post your questions as we're having the discussion. With that, I'll turn it over to Melody Barnes.
Great. Thank you so much, Roberto. And I'm really excited about this conversation today and the President's announcement yesterday. You know, that announcement builds on the work that we started almost a year ago with the Recovery Act. We were able to secure a pot of money that we call Race to the Top to engender a competition among states. And as Roberto said, now we're going to include school districts in that competition to really advance 4 different things in our education reform agenda. One, we have to make sure that we are turning around our lowest performing schools in the country. 2, we have to make sure that we are getting and retaining the best teachers, the best principals, the best leaders in our public school system. We have to make sure that we're setting the right standards for our children so that they're able to compete and be competitive in a global economy, and to make sure that we are assessing whether or not they're able to meet those standards. And finally, we want to make sure that we're giving teachers and parents the tools they need through data so that they can assess student performance and make sure for parents that their children are progressing through their school education in the right and appropriate way, and that they're able to make it to high school graduation and then be able to go on to college or to compete for a job successfully. So the announcement from yesterday is going to allow us to build on those 4 goals, as Roberto said, to extend that to school districts and to make sure that we're expanding the Race to the Top, that 41 states yesterday said that they want to participate in.
That's terrific. Thank you, Melody. So we'll go ahead and start taking some of your questions about Race to the Top and the President's education priorities. Let's start with a question from BlogHer coming from Joanna, who blogs at Pundit Mom. Joanna asks how we're going to retool our public schools so that we move away from the whole teach to the test phenomena and really begin to teach our children to be more critical thinkers.
Absolutely, that's a great question. And in fact, that's one of the things that the President started talking about during the campaign, and we certainly built into the Race to the Top standards, what we call those 4 assurances that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. And because we want to reform our standards and assessments, we are doing that because one of our key goals is making sure that students aren't just filling in those bubbles and learning, as Joanna said, to respond to a specific question on a test. That in fact, that what they're getting out of their educational experience is the opportunity to become critical thinkers, to analyze information well, and to take those skills and move that to other subject matter areas and take that as they move from grade level to grade level. Our focus on standards and assessments will allow us to do that by determining what the right kinds of standards are for a grade level, and also to determine what the right kinds of assessments are. Now, we aren't going to be doing that sitting here in Washington, D.C. That's something that we're doing working with states and engendering the right kind of flexibility, but we're setting that as a high goal. We're also working with the 48 states that have started working together to come up with the right kinds of standards. And again, this is something that's happening from the bottom up as governors are responding to what they're hearing from the school districts in their states.
Terrific. Melody, you mentioned that one of the key pillars of the Race to the Top is training, developing, and keeping our most talented teachers in the classrooms that need them the most. That's a question that Chris had from the Momathon blog. Chris asks, how do we keep our talented teachers in the system when the bureaucracy in education seems to be taking over the school? Can you share any thoughts on our particular agenda for supporting and retaining our teachers through Race to the Top?
Sure. And, you know, as Chris knows, a teacher, and the president has said this, a teacher is the most critical factor in a student's life. You know, it's been a long time since I was in elementary school or high school, but I still remember those teachers that made a difference in my life. You know, Rodney Suddeth, who was my history teacher, or P.Q. Taylor, who was my science teacher. So the idea that we're getting those kinds of teachers who are having that kind of effect on a student's life is important. So we're focusing on making sure that in schools of education that they are properly training their teachers, and we're incentivizing that. But also, once we have teachers in the system, that we are providing those more junior teachers with mentors, more senior teachers who have been involved in the educational system for quite some time, so that they can impart their best skills and their best knowledge to those junior teachers and provide them with the kind of support that they need so that they will stay in the system. Obviously, we're also thinking about how we are compensating our teachers and working with communities and having school districts and administrators and parents and the teaching profession involved in thinking about appropriate compensation, or as we talk about in terms of pay for performance. You know, one of the things that we also talked about in the context of the Race to the Top is making sure that states can consider teacher performance along with the evaluation of student performance, and making sure that those two things are connected. We think that's important, but we also believe that we have to give teachers the right kinds of tools and skills and equipment to be able to do their job in the right way.
Thank you, Melody. The president has talked about education as being an economic imperative and critical to our future competitiveness. Zamina Singh submits a question to us from Facebook, and she asks, America is so far behind on education that China and India will move forward and leave us behind because of the lack of our adequate education system here. So she urges our administration to fund education and to make it more of a #1 issue.
Right.
Any thoughts on that?
Right. Well, that's certainly been one of the criticisms and one of the concerns that we've been articulating for a number of years. It's, again, one of the things that the president talked about during the course of the campaign. Our budget will be coming out in the next few weeks, at the beginning of February, as budgets do every year. And I think you should look towards that to see what kind of commitment we're making toward education. But we also believe, and the president has said this repeatedly, that this isn't just an issue of just funding. We have to be able to fund and support schools and school districts and states in the way that they need it, but at the same time we have to ensure the proper kinds of reforms as well as the engagement of parents and community leaders. So our education reform agenda really includes all of those things, proper supports so that schools and states are able to do what they need to do, but also the encouragement of public-private partnerships and engaging the business community and other parts of civil society to support our school systems, as well as encouraging and finding ways to get the engagement of parents in the education of their children.
Great. There is a question here also coming from Facebook from David Vanderhoofen. And David has some concerns about the federal role in education. He directs a question to the president asking to respond to the charges that our education program might be a power grab that would look at taking education out of the control of states and consolidating power at the federal level. Can you respond to his question?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, one of the things I think everyone has to remember, and we certainly remember it as we do our work, as Roberto and I and our colleagues, is that the federal role, the federal investment in education is actually rather small.
Right.
But at the same time, we want to make sure that our students are able to compete on a global level, that we aren't downgrading our assessments or what we are asking and hoping that our students, that our children will learn. So one of the things that we're doing through Race to the Top and the rest of our education agenda is really incentivizing states, learning from what states are doing, the best practices that they have there, working hard with local and community leaders. And the Race to the Top really is all about saying this is a competition. Here are the kinds of standards, here are the 4 principles that we think are important, but you tell us how you are going to work within your school district, within your state, to try and creatively and innovatively meet those kinds of standards. You know, I think our education secretary often talks about this in terms of tight loose,
Right.
that we want to make sure that we are tight and firm about the kinds of overall goals that should be achieved, but at the same time we want to encourage and leave room for flexibility and innovation in states and in school districts.
Terrific. We have a question from Lisa Minkov coming to us from Facebook, and she's asking about special education teachers and special education funding certainly being such a big priority. And I know the Recovery Act enacted earlier this year invested over $10 billion in the special education program. She's wondering whether special education teachers are part of Race to the Top and what role states will play moving forward with that.
Right, I mean, and Roberto, you appropriately flagged the fact that when we started our work last January and February moving the Recovery Act through, that we included a significant investment for IDEA, an investment for special education. Again, excuse me, our budget will be coming out soon, but I think what you'll find is a consistent commitment to the needs of special education students as well as teachers, and making sure that those students have the same opportunities to succeed, the same ability to raise to the top as the rest of our students.
The beauty of Race to the Top, as you know, Melody, is also that we're looking at the preparation as well as the development of those teachers too. So there will be encouragement across the country to look at preparing teachers in high need subjects like special education and teachers of English language learners and other diverse populations. There's a question here coming to us from Carla Clay, and Carla is wondering about the role and structure of art and science education in our schools. She's wondering how we can capitalize on the programs that have kept arts and the sciences alive in the U.S.
Right, well, what the president has said to us consistently, and I think Roberto can attest that he's been pushing us all hard, specifically with looking at what we call the STEM education issues, science, technology, education, engineering, and mathematics. We believe that those areas are critical to our ability to compete globally. So what we've done is that we've put a special emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and math in Race to the Top. I think it's the only competitive priority there that incentivizes states to think about the kind of public-private partnerships that they can form to make sure that they are supporting teachers in those areas, and also making sure that they encourage underrepresented populations in those areas to support them both in their education as well as in the teaching field. We want to make sure that we are sending students well-versed and well-prepared in those areas on to college or to community college and into their jobs. So we have a particular focus there. We also recently launched a program that we call Educate to Innovate, where we are working with the business community and the philanthropic community to form the kinds of partnerships that I just mentioned so that we can support teachers and we can support schools and school districts in the STEM areas.
Terrific, thank you. We also have a question coming to us from Kathy, who blogs at Domestic Psychology. Kathy is asking about charter schools and wondering whether the push for charter schools across the country will be monitored so that it doesn't leave the needs of special populations out and that it provides new opportunities for all students. Can you comment on the role of charter schools relative to the Race to the Top in our agenda?
Sure. The charter schools, as I think people probably have heard the president say, are an important and an innovative tool as we look for the best ways to educate our students. So the president has been a strong supporter of charter schools, and we think particularly as we are one way as we approach low-performing schools and thinking about turning them around, that charters can be one response to reconstituting or rethinking how students are being educated who currently are in low-performing schools. It's one of the things that we've done or that we've seen in Race to the Top because we want to encourage states to encourage the proliferation of charter schools to lift bans or caps that they may have on charter schools, and we've seen a number of states move forward and do that, or states that were thinking about ways to restrict, move and step away from those more restrictive actions. So what we're hoping to find is that around the country, states and school districts are encouraging the growth of the charter school movement, as they also are with magnet schools and other types of schools within the public school system.
Terrific. We have a great conversation emerging here on Facebook regarding the role of education policy around the needs of gifted and talented students. And certainly that's an important population relative to the achievement gap and really helping close the achievement gap. I know we've done a lot in looking at how we differentiate instruction and support teachers around differentiation. A good portion of that certainly is looking at how we can better train and develop our teachers. I know that's part of the race to the top as well, right?
Absolutely, and I think we were talking about this recently. The whole idea behind, the philosophy behind Race to the Top is not setting a low bar for our students and hoping that they can achieve that, and holding back our most gifted and talented students, but making sure that we create a space for our more gifted and talented students to succeed, and hoping that we're also pulling the rest of the student population behind them. So we are definitely looking for ways, and built into our desire to find gifted and talented teachers and leaders to give them the support they need in those subject matter areas. And also, again, going back to that early question about standards and assessments, to make sure that we aren't just teaching to the test, but really giving students more room to run, those students who can do more and who can stretch harder, giving them the space to be able to do that, and a way of assessing their ability and giving them new challenges so that they can progress even further. I don't know, Roberto, if you have other thoughts on that.
I think that's absolutely right, and really, as you mentioned, really we're looking for a race to the top for all students. It's about really differentiating instruction so that we can challenge all students to be able to meet these college and career-ready standards. Here's a question coming to us from Facebook that is a concern that we hear across the country around the current state of education. It's written by Judy, and she's asking you, Melody, whether she's saying that she's dissatisfied with her local school district's one-size-fits-all approach to education. How can we make schools more accommodating to students with different than average needs and go back to seeing students as individuals, nurture their individual learning and their individual strengths? Right.
Well, again, I think the focus on smart assessments built and predicated on, good, high standards for all of our children is certainly one way to do it. And also encouraging the development of different kinds of schools that will meet the needs of different kinds of students. Again, that goes back to our conversation about charter schools and magnet schools and other types of schools, so that parents can find within the public school system the right kind of educational experience for their child.
Terrific. I think this is our last question for the session. Appreciate everybody joining us. This question comes from Kirsten Drager from Colorado, and it's around the current state of education and funding in Colorado. Kirsten notes that in Colorado they have nearly 30 kids per classroom already, and that may even go up to 40 kids by next year because of the budget cuts and the number of school closures. With no teacher's aid and no help, she's worried that teachers might be stretched too thin.
Well, that's certainly one of the things that we try to address. I mean, growing class sizes as states are and districts are facing lower tax revenues and just really straining under the impact of our current economic crisis. So the first thing we did was put that state fiscal stabilization money into place to try and prevent the laying off and firing of teachers, so that we could also try and prevent growing class sizes. So that's something that's been important to us, that we're focused on, and we've been pushing those monies out all around the country. but also our focus on teachers and leaders, again, giving teachers the skills and the support that they need so that they can provide the best classroom experience for their students.
I know the Department of Education has really been doing a fantastic job of working hard to get those dollars out of the door that you mentioned through the State Stabilization Fund. And there is a second set of dollars that have yet to be allocated through the state's over $10 billion. So hopefully some of that can go out shortly and still be able to provide some relief. Thank you so much for joining us for this chat on education policy.